Well, welcome. Hello to everybody. This is John Brodie, and we're here with another podcast for the adventure of a lifetime. And today, again, I'm going to have the pleasure of talking with Linda Granville, author of the phenomenal book, Dark Holy Ground. It's a memoir of her life, and she's lived all these stories that are so important, I think, to the whole transformational idea that we have around the human renaissance that we've been talking about in all of my writing and promoting online and so forth at our Substack. And so today we're going to go into probably one of the most important chapters for our overall planet and civilization, and that's her chapter 2, which is a chapter called Market Capitalism, Consequences and Solutions. And it looks like we have Linda Granville joining us right now, so it's perfect timing, Linda. I welcome you today. How are you?
I'm good, thanks, John. All the better for seeing you.
All right, very good. Well, I was just now introducing. Of course, this is the book. Let's see if we can put it up there. We'll have a link to. Here. I'll just hold it like that. There we go. Oh, we got it. This is a copy of Linda's book, and as I said today, we're going to be looking at what I think is probably one of the most important chapters as far as our future and the whole human renaissance movement that I've been talking about. A chapter called Market Capitalism, Consequences and Solutions. And again, I was just introducing the book a little bit and I'll tell you, I'll let Linda can introduce herself as she talks. I think you may have seen the previous episode that we did, which was really tied into the introduction of the book and kind of an overview. And we're going to do a series of these, I think, to get into some of the ideas, because the book is so rich with wonderful ideas for not only great life stories, but ideas for making a difference on the planet. And I think that the thing that has always, really endeared me to Linda and brought us close to become very good friends is the fact that her whole life has really been dedicated to helping make a better world, to being a benefit to others, and I think that is the future. I think that the changes that we're going to see, the transformation that's occurring now, is going to be very much away from the age of the individual and a remembering of the importance of community. And the fact that we are all one family on this little planet who's going at 60,000, many thousands of miles per hour around the sun every day. So anyway, we'll start there. So Linda, how are you doing today?
I'm good. I'm good. I'm just needing the issues in my book out there. That's what this is about,
Very
because
good.
I think
Okay.
the issues are
If you can
important.
speak up a little louder, or maybe just get a little closer to the microphone, because I
Okay.
want to make sure. I'll turn mine up here too. All right, so hopefully that will be good. Well, I know that you actually start your book, or start the chapter 2 starts with a quote from Gandhi saying, "We are only as rich as our poorest neighbor," and that's a perfect starting point for the chapter, because it really, in very few words, states the main idea that I've been working with in the human renaissance movement, and that runs through your whole book. And that is that if we do not show care and responsibility to all of our neighbors, then we are not serving the planet, not serving the world, and really not being the other thing that's come up in my work is the idea of being good ancestors. We have inherited the world we have from our ancestors, and they obviously have not always done everything perfectly, but where we are is our children, our grandchildren, and many generations down are going to inherit the world that we leave them. So right now, we're kind of in the driver's seat, and I think that a lot of people, it will be beneficial if a lot of people can take a longer view and not just think about, you know, what's going to be, how much money they're going to make this year, or you know, or whether they're going to be able to buy that new car, or whatever it is. And it's not to say there's anything wrong with any of that. It's just our we need a longer focus because our planet is suffering from a lot of trauma right now. Really, quite frankly, I mean, I think particularly with the heat wave that we've had around the world right now. It's getting less and less possible for anybody to be a climate denier. There are obviously changes going on in our climate. And that's not to say that we haven't had hot days before, but this is a bit of a trend, just like the storms that we've been experiencing have tended to be more intense and come up much more rapidly. And so the effects that people have been talking about and fearing for a long time are becoming much more evident. And I think that the fear is not the right response, though. I think that the thing to remember is that we all have agency. And one of the great things is Linda's really been demonstrating this her whole life. You know, she's not sat around complaining about, what her life is. You know, she's had a life full with challenges, and yet she's consistently looked for ways to find solutions. And in doing that, she's always, I think, and she's always been very much a part of the communities wherever she was in the world, and she's been all over the world. And so, at any rate, let's start with that. Why don't you give me a little idea about what your basic feelings are about this chapter, and then we'll go into some specific questions that I have about it.
Well, I think just to maybe include something that was said in the first chapter, on the first video, is about where I was at that time. Because I was bringing up two children. I had different fathers. Just to, you might have heard this before, but I had different fathers, but I was bringing them up in a town called Middlesbrough. And Middlesbrough was the highest unemployed town in the UK, with the demise of the shipbuilding, the iron and steel, and the chemical industry. We had two big ICI chemical plants as well. And tens of thousands of local people were out of work. And so I belonged to an organisation called Respond, which was a church ecumenical organisation that looked into the issues of Teesside and to find ways forward for these tens of thousands of people where there was no jobs around. And so we look for solutions. We look for solutions to value all people in or out of paid work. And but luckily, somebody introduced me to Respond. It was set up in 1986 as a faith in the city response to the demise of all those industries. It looked for more holistic ways of valuing people. The aim of Respond, I'll just read it from here because I need to be right with this one. The aim of Respond was to facilitate the discovery of practical new responses to the social and economic crisis that embraced the spiritual, physical, and wealth-creating potentials of all people. And the people of Respond, when I was first introduced to them, because I was struggling on the breadline, bringing up my two children, but the people of Respond stood beside me, listened, accepted me without judgment. They trusted my opinions and they enabled me to think. Anyway, 10 years later, I became a voluntary chairperson, but something happened and it stopped working. It was because the Barings Bank collapsed and we got our funding from the Barings Bank. But that's something else again about the banking system I won't go into here.
Yeah. And I really think that the greatest harm is the lack of respect for people.
Yes.
The fact, the idea of, People, a lot of people don't think about it. They figure, well, these people are on the dole, or or taking
Oh,
from
yes.
just taking from society, and they could, why don't they get a job, whatever. And why don't you respond to that a little bit, because I think that's a common thing, and I think it really comes from a misunderstanding about possibility and about how the
Well,
system's set up.
well, it started. It's You have to see the history of the economic system and the way how it's turned out today with this top-down competitive economic system, where actually, competition inevitably means more losers than winners. So what happens to the losers? And I read a book with Respond. We read a book by a bloke called Richard Douthwaite. And I'd like, so I get this right as well. I'd like to read what I read. So we in Respond opened our eyes to the changing scene that was unfolding before us. In his book Short Circuit, Richard Douthwaite told us global economic changes first started taking place in 1971, when America came away from the gold standard, which was the last fixed link between real goods and paper money. The monetary world had no foundation. Britain joined the European Economic Community, the EEC, in 1973, curtailing our economic freedom. The Kennedy and Tokyo General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade Treaties, GATT, reduced the rates of duty they imposed on imports from other participants. Britain then had a flood of clothes, shoes, and textiles from cheap labour countries, and employment in British firms manufacturing them fell from 973,000 to 412,000 between 1973 and 1993. Other industries followed suit. With Margaret Thatcher came complete abolition of exchange controls in 1979. Concessions enabled the banks and financial institutions to move money to wherever in the world they could obtain the highest return. This proved that, contrary to popular belief, unemployed people were not responsible for their own unemployment. The government changed the name unemployment benefit to job seekers allowance, which put the blame on unemployed people not to have a job. We weren't responsible, but then we were called dole scroungers. We were told all kinds of things. The government answer to these economic systems was to advocate full employment at any cost. But how can you get employment for tens of thousands of local people out of work? It was the other parts of the country were all right. They were in paid work, but they weren't in our situation. But we got called dole scroungers. The government said you have to have a paid job as an undisputed goal in life at any cost. The setting up of norms is an important part of the ideology. An ideology legitimizes the status quo and will establish what is normal and what is abnormal. The ideology of full employment is so ingrained. When people are outside of it, they are labelled dole scroungers, always living with a threatening dark cloud of losing benefits forever hovering over their heads, and treated with contempt. But in Brussels, written on the epitaph of Father Joseph Woodlensky, are his words: "When I speak to people in extreme poverty, they tell me it's not so much the lack of a job that despairs me. It's not the lack of bread on the table. It's in the contempt of my fellow citizens. It is this contempt that lies between despair and justice and basic human rights. And Father Widlensky was the founder of Fourth World ADT, an organisation committed to a world that is free of poverty. There used to be streets. I used to live in. There were streets in my town where the top end of the street were like what I call the posh end, were getting paid. But we lived. The people on the bottom end of the street lived 10 years less than the people at the top end of the street. As a single parent, they always called me in what I thought of the budget, and what I noticed was they only talked about the budget from the point of view of the taxpayer. Well, where did that leave the tens of thousands of people in Middlesbrough or couldn't possibly pay tax because there weren't the jobs around? Who helped them if they only spoke from the point of view of the taxpayer? Well, there was so much, there was lots of unfair government things going on for people in the community, for people who wanted work. Like you could get like a lot of people, there was a program where somebody got a £10 dole top up working next to people who were living with a living wage. And I thought that was unfair. Why can't they get a living wage if they're working, doing the same job? And then Respond sent 3 of us to Ireland to look at an intermediate program for people unemployed. The part-time job opportunity program we visited midway of its program, and it was a joy to see self-worth in the eyes of all the participants. And it was made by the Religious of Ireland. It was devised by the Religious of Ireland, and I went through to see it in the middle of its pilot program. Firstly, the income the participants received was inadequate. Secondly, most of them were forced to remain idle as a condition to receive social welfare and to be available for work, even though the jobs didn't even exist for them. And thirdly, as a result of their involvement and adequate income, they were alienated from the mainstream of society. And I can certainly vouch for that, because all of us who were, were unable to pay tax, were alienated. We couldn't afford to go to a cafe. We couldn't afford to go to a cafe and pay money what cafes charge. We couldn't afford to go for a social night out because the pittance we had just wouldn't cover that. And we lived quite isolated. And the aims of the part-time job opportunities program was one, to enhance the dignity of unemployed people by giving them an opportunity to be involved in some kind of meaningful work. And 2, to broaden the meaning of work to include, in particular, socially environmental work. Another one, to begin the process of putting value on this work by having an hourly wage agreed upon. And then challenge the availability for a job rule, which demands that unemployed people, as a condition of receiving their unemployment assistance, remain idle. I mean, it was crazy. We couldn't do any voluntary work. We weren't allowed to do voluntary work because it was deemed that we weren't available for real work when there was no real work around. It was crazy. In this initiative, when a person has worked the required hours, they are free for the rest of the week. If they take another part-time job and the income from it brings them into the tax net, they are taxed in the usual way. Then another provision was provide education and training that is relevant to the work being done and enhances the job opportunities and quality of life of the employee, both the employer and the employee participating in designing this education and training. The next one is pay the going rate for the job. So pay the going rate for the job it is important that employed people are not seen as cheap labour. This also ensures that the jobs of other employees are not undermined by initiatives which take on unemployed people at cheaper rates of pay. So Respond, the organisation I was involved with, partnered up with Teesside Industrial Mission, Shape Training, the Church of England and the New Economics Foundation. We tried very hard to get this implemented in Teesside, but with just a few alterations to fit into the British government. However, it failed because the Irish model depended on the dole being transferred to the employer to enable them to pay the workers with dignity. The British government wouldn't allow that transfer, so we Brits had to still contend with unjust work schemes. And I thought that was worth reading to get it right, because I think that was a brilliant programme. Economic system is full of competition. It's full of competition, but like I said earlier, competition inevitably implies more losers than winners. So what happens to the losers? And what the government put out was the single regeneration budget, which people had to apply for it. They had to be in competition, they had to be in competition to get this money. And if they got the money, tens of thousands of pounds were given to that community to build, to do things in that particular community. Because they have to be in competition, it depended on the person who put the funding bid in. And if there was a community that didn't even know how to put a proper funding bid in, sometimes it wasn't that wasn't the greatest need. And I, with Respond, I visited a housing estate, and there was two small communities very close to each other, with just a little manor road going between them. And sometimes there was family across the road, family got houses nearby, just across the road from this other estate. And, and friends were across the road from each other. And one community, before the regeneration budget, one community got new double glazing. Well, double glazing is really important for people in poverty because it lowers fuel bills and it keeps people warm. It helps, yes. So double glazing is really important. And then the regeneration thing came out, and this was applying with this community. And the people already had just been given the double glazing won the bid. Well, this community felt alienated. They felt, it was a bit unfair that they didn't even have double glazing and they already had it. And they took out the brand new double glazing and put new double glazing in, and it really divided that community. They were against each other. And that's the competition, and I actually spoke at the All-Party Committee for Poverty about this issue. And, I just got told, well, yes, we know that was a problem. But it's a big problem when people are supporting each other, when local communities are supporting each other for nothing, mostly for nothing, but then this comes in with all of this, thousands of pounds for them and nothing for them, just more or less in the same area. And it must have been terrible for them to sit back and watch it all happen, and they had nothing.
Well,
and they were going cold,
Can you hear the whispers? I can feel the beat from the chambers of power to the heart of the street. Justice promised to hold us, a beacon for the weak, but policies in the shadows left the truth feeling bleak. With words like regeneration, oh, they sounded so divine. Yet down on these rugged roads, they drew a different line. I stood between the estates, just a narrow road apart. How easy it is for systems to forget the human heart. Neighbors turn to rivals, hope strained by paperwork's weight. But I felt the turning tide, I knew it wasn't too late. True progress means we rise, side by side. No more poor against poor, let love be our guide. Together we can build a world that heals. With every voice united, it's the truth that reveals. In the heart of Teesside, the stories intertwine. Each life a mosaic, yet we share this design. Human rights aren't just words framed for show. They live in our struggles, in the fire we grow. When the system forgets you, don't let silence confine. Hope springs eternal, our strength will align. We're more than the labels that the world loves to see. When we stand together, that's where we're truly free. True progress means we rise, side by side. No more poor against poor, let love be our guide. Together we can build a world that heals. With every voice united, it's the truth that reveals. People rising together, hands clasped in the night. Our dreams becoming bridges full of vibrant light. No more division, we'll rewrite the lines, creating a harmony where our spirits shine. True justice means protection for every soul and heart. We'll lift the most vulnerable, we'll make a new start. Side by side, oh, that's where we belong. In this rhythm of humanity, together we'll be strong.
So welcome back, everybody. Hope you enjoyed that song. As I said, we'll have a little more information on the song at the end here. But today, I'd like to go on to the next section here. It was a fascinating story in the book that I felt was kind of illustrative of the situation for a lot of people, who through no fault of their own were their lives were really diminished and torn apart just by things that were totally out of their control, not because they lacked any skills or anything else. And so, tell us about the story of the race car builder that you talk about in your book.
Okay. Well, there was so many rules and regulations to get your dough. Things you couldn't do. You couldn't do voluntary work. You couldn't do because you had to be available for work. It was crazy in Middlesbrough. And all these rules and regulations. At one time, people came away from those rules and regulations. There was 100,000 people refused to take benefits at one time. And then 2 years later, it got even more serious that, different work programs that didn't really work for the poorest of us. And 2 years later, that turned to 300,000 people not having benefits. And one of the reasons not having benefits, because benefits had so much stigma in it, that men who once had a really wonderful job, the only jobs around were like part-time jobs or like women's work jobs type of thing. And men knew the palpable stigma of being on means-tested benefits. They knew the stigma and they refused that stigma because they knew they were better than being stigmatized because they didn't have a job which wasn't their fault.
And so this guy that had been a very successful race car
Yes, so
builder.
that's right. Yes, so he was one of the people who wouldn't take benefits. He used to be a racing car builder, and with the economic system and the bank system falling down, he lost his business. Then his wife and children left him, and he ended up in a homeless hostel. And I went to see him while he was in the homeless hostel. And I was there when he was having his lunch. It was lunchtime, and I went to see him. And he was served 2 fried eggs on some brown bread. And he asked the people who served him the meal if he could have white slices instead of the brown slice, because the white slice was bigger than the brown slice, and he was hungry. And he was told, "Eat what you're given. I pay tax, so I paid for this. You didn't." That was horrible. That was horrible. I've visited other homeless shelters before, and I've never seen that happen, ever. They're usually lovely people. But this, I pay tax, you didn't, and I paid for this. And he didn't even ask for an extra slice of bread. He just asked for a white piece of bread instead of a brown piece. And that's how a lot of us were treated. We were treated like that. Through no fault of our own, really. So it has to change. We can't have this top-down economic system.
Well, one of the
have to have people underneath them to tell them what to do. No, they prefer to go homeless.
Yes, one of the key things that you talk about in your book that is time banks, and I know it's a real passion of yours, and it really addresses a lot of these problems because of the fact that so many things in society that have great value for quality of life don't have a monetary value, and it can be taking care of children, or helping somebody shovel their front walk and after a snowstorm, lots of things that that have definite value, but the society doesn't monetize. So tell us a little bit about how time banks are set up and what the idea is behind them.
I believe that the true wealth of any community does not rely on money, because we couldn't rely on money, but on the talents and resources of people. And that's really true. And the time bank is a system where people pool their skills and they help each other for nothing. I could do a job for you, but you may not have what I want. But you can dip into the pool of skills that people have offered, pool of skills to get what I want, and it's brilliant. I had more things, and for me, it revalued women's work, home workers, carers, all those who do loads of voluntary work but struggle on the breadline, But at the time when we set it first up in Teesside, it was called a let system. There were 2 things. There was a let system and a let scheme. Well, the let system valued each transaction the same as society values the transaction. But the let scheme, ours was a let scheme, which everybody's work was valued the same.
So in other
And
words,
it
like
was only a tick. It was only a tick in the book. It was
1
only a
hour.
tick in the book.
So it'd be
1
1
hour
hour
of
of
anybody's
time.
work. 1 hour of anybody's work was transacted. Like for instance, when I first set them up, 30 years and 10 driving tests to buy a really cheap banger, a B-Reg Renault. 3 days later, it took me 30 years, and 3 days later I said hello to a bus. And that was a complete a complete waste of 30 years trying to pass my driving test. But somebody on the time bank at the time completely rebuilt that car for nothing. He wanted somebody, carpet fitter. There wasn't a carpet fitter on the time bank, so we got a carpet fitter to join. And then he got his carpet fitter for nothing. I got my car fixed and I painted an oil painting for somebody else, you know. So everybody, and also another example was my next door neighbour. This was years later when, after I came back from Australia and I retired, and I tried to set up a skills exchange in the rural area where I now live. And I had a next door neighbour called Edna. She was our oldest member of the Time Bank. I wrote a pantomime to promote the Time Bank because our unit of currency was called a doofer. And our motto was, we do for each other. Now, unit of currency was only a tick in a book, you know, and our motto was, we do for each other. So I wrote a pantomime and called Floor White and the Seven Doofers. And we took it round all the local villages, you know. And I was putting leaflets around the village to promote the Time Bank because we were going to do it in this village. And Edna was in my house. She was 95 at the time. And she asked me what I was doing. I said, I'm just going to go around the village to, you know, to put the leaflets around the thing. And it's a throwaway remark, not really expecting her to say anything, you know, then that was ageist from my part, I know that. There's a throwaway remark. I said, you can help me if you like. She turned around and said, can I? Will that mean I'll be useful? And that is the beauty of the Time Bank, not just getting jobs done for you, but empowering people to use the skill they had. Her skill was delivering leaflets, you know, and she was flooded out twice in 2000 when the village was flooded in 2000, and she was moved up the middle of the village where I now live, and she told me when she came back that I kept an eye on her across because I live in a valley. And she did that side of the valley, I did this side of the valley, and I kept looking over to see if she was all right and all this. And she was talking to people who opened the door to her, you know. And when she came back, I said, how was it? She said, oh, I was speaking. She hadn't spoken to us since from 15 years ago when she used to live there. And she hadn't spoken to her friends for all those years, and she enjoyed it. And so I said, and she turned to me and said, am I useful now? That's really, really the thing, because so many people have got so many gifts locked inside of them, but because money isn't there, they're not using them and they feel useless to society. And this revalues everybody, whether you're in paid work or out of paid work. It's a catalyst. I've used them to bring different faiths together, you know, to bring all marginalized groups into a time bank. And, you know, if somebody I didn't like joined the time bank, who could fix my car, you know, I wouldn't care if I like them or not. They can fix my car. You know, it brings, and we had lots of social events because it's a big problem in the world today is isolation. And isolation, you know, so on the time bank, what I did on the time bank, I offered meditation groups to alleviate stress because there was a lot of stress around. I offered meditation groups. And I also offered lifts to the doctors, lifts for shopping, lifts out to the seaside or the country, you know, to give people a day out, because I know what it was like before I ever had a car, not to have a day out. And so it was good for me to give people a day out. and we had social events, and the social events hardly cost us anything because organisations were involved, and so any social event we had, the organisation would offer us a room to do an event. And then people would offer their skills, like people who wanted to do vegetarian food would offer their food, and somebody else who could do singing and dancing or juggling, that offer their juggling skills, and things like that. We used to have lovely events with nothing to pay for, because everybody just offered it off the time bank and they got a do for doing something. And a lot of people complained that they already did voluntary work and they couldn't. But that didn't matter, because if you did voluntary work for an organisation, which is really important, and but that organisation joined the time bank, as long as the organisation was part of the time bank, they could still do the voluntary work, and that's their doofus. Because a lot of voluntary work, I was a voluntary worker for 18 years and still struggled with nothing for myself. I struggled until time banks came, and it was justice. For me, it was justice, all the voluntary work I did, and it's in my book what voluntary work I did, but for 18 years, but I struggled with nothing, with no money for anything. But once I joined the time bank, I didn't need the money, we helped each other. And it was good. After listening to lots of people, I listened to people across Europe about their poverty with different European organisations through Respond and Church Action on Poverty I was involved with as well. And we listened to all kinds of people in poverty. And then I thought to myself, why does the world economy only ever include the word money? Why do we always look for a money solution when money doesn't trickle down to the poor in our trickle-down economic system? And the only thing that does trickle down is fear, and it goes from top to bottom. It goes from fear of losing government position, losing business, losing jobs, moving dole, and losing what little bit of money we have. So we live in an economic system that's full of fear, And another question I asked myself, why couldn't everybody have the potential to gain non-compulsory job satisfaction as I had, but without having to live so frugally? And another thing I thought about, well, what kind of system could eliminate the unjust stigma of means-tested benefits and the oppressive prejudice and marginalisation that go with it? And what kind of system could justly value the second largest industry in Britain, the unpaid workers sector, worth £41 billion to the British economy? And what kind of system could give people a choice in the work that they did, thus reaching their potential? And then what kind of system would value those who worked long hours with low pay and support the growing millions of people in and out of contract or part-time jobs? What kind of system, when all people's economic freedom is secure, will eliminate prejudicial scapegoating? And believe me, as a single parent on the dole, I knew a lot about prejudicial scapegoating. I believe alongside time banks, citizens' income has that potential. Citizens' income is sometimes called basic income. Is an unconditional, one-withdrawable income payable to each individual as a right of citizenship. Just as family allowance in the UK is given to every child. People's work, and this is the people where people go, oh, people's work is separated from pay, and every citizen gets a basic income, yet higher than the current benefit level. People argue that will be too expensive. However, all current tax systems and benefit rules would be abolished. At a citizens' income conference, it was suggested that anybody who does paid work on top of citizens' income would pay a flat rate tax of 37%. This might seem higher than the current 22%, but citizens' income abolishes national insurance contributions, VAT, value-added tax, and the massive cost of policing the current system. And the difference is then only 1 to 2%. People who pollute the atmosphere could be taxed. If our mission is to promote a more just economic system, and then we need to shout out loud for citizens' income. But if you must insist on sticking to the trickle-down economic system, let generosity trickle down instead of greed. Let truth trickle down instead of closing your eyes to reality. Let standing beside your fellow woman or man, in whatever condition she or he is in, trickle down instead of bigotry. Let hope trickle down instead of suicidal hopelessness. Let love trickle down instead of hate. And let the fear of poverty disappear forever.
It's we're gonna do other chapters because there's just a wealth of information about our society and about how things have developed the way they have. And mostly the thing that I really enjoy about Dark Holy Ground, Linda's book, is it is a book about solutions. I mean, she shared, we've shared some of the ideas here, with time banks and universal citizens income. I think those are two ideas that are actually, they've been around for a while. But they're both of those ideas are starting to come back into the mainstream because they solve a tremendous number of problems, and particularly as artificial intelligence. I mean, the artificial intelligence is going to produce a lot of wonderful things for us, but one of the things it's almost certainly going to do is it's going to eliminate a lot of basic jobs. In other words, jobs that are, kind of repetitive labor, not jobs necessarily that people love doing, but jobs that provide a good income and a sense of respect for having a job and for making your contribution. And a lot of those jobs are going to disappear, and it's going to be necessary it's going to free people to spend more time on things that they really want to do. Whether it's being an artist, whether it's deciding to work in agriculture, planting gardens, whatever. But the key thing is, we're in the process of a transition, and the citizens' income and the time banks are a key solution, a way to move forward and into stronger and more resilient communities. Yes, Linda.
Can I just say, John, that I have a long-term, I hope it's not a long-term vision, but it's a vision that the whole country will be in sharing each other's resources, getting to know each other as people, eliminating prejudice. We can cross all kinds of barriers with time banks. It crosses all kinds of, I've used it throughout my life. I've set them up in different places just to cross those barriers, and if we all just share what we've got, and we don't eliminate anybody who doesn't have a paid job. The paid job bit is but time banks with citizens' income, both of those together, so that we can survive. Because more people now are in the state where Middlesbrough was 30 years ago. And so we found some solutions, not every solution, but some solutions for all of this kind of thing. I really want my book out there to give it to stop all this racial divisive rhetoric going around the world and blaming people for things they're not responsible for.
We didn't really touch on that, but that's a key part of it, because a lot of the like, for example, in the United States right now and other places around the world too, there's this an anti-immigrant idea, and it's based on a false premise that somehow these immigrants are taking jobs away
Yeah.
from everybody else, when that's really not the case at all. It's
I know.
so again, it's a big discussion, and it's one where I think that we need to start getting back to community-based solutions. And I thank you very much for this, and we will do this again. Because as I say, there are several more powerful chapters in your book.
Yes, I've worked with sanctuary seekers, and there's a chapter in my book about sanctuary seekers, working with them.
Yes, and several other very important issues with LGBT issues and many others that Linda has had an opportunity to directly be involved with, helping people rise above perceived problems and kind of reclaim their human dignity, which is kind of what it's all about, and helping create a more genuine and compassionate and loving world. And anyway, with that, Linda, I thank you, and we're going to end this with one more song that from the collection, which is a Trickle Down Love, and we'll have that as I think that'll kind of wraps up this section of our talk as well. And so again, I thank you, Linda.
Thank you, John. I appreciate it.
We will look forward. We'll look forward to the next session on
Brilliant.
whichever chapter we pick, which is all filled with. I recommend you all go out there and get a copy of this book and take a look at it. And at the end, I'll put a link to how you can get it on Amazon. It's available on Amazon, and the music's available on all the streaming services. So we'll do that, and we will have more in the future. So again, thank you, Linda, and we'll play the song now. Trickle Down Love.
Bye.
Oh, let it trickle down. Yeah, let it flow through the streets. Let it lift up the heart. Let it bring back the beats. Hey. Oh, yeah. Why does the word economy always mean just cash? Chasing hollow promises, we're caught in the clash. They said wealth would rise like a tide, lift up those in need. But the only thing that trickled down was a fear-filled creed.
Fear of losing power, fear of losing face, fear of what tomorrow holds in this relentless race. Yet fear can feed a hungry soul, it only pulls us down. Let's turn that fear to kindness, spread love all around.
If you're gonna let it trickle down, let generosity flow, let you roll like a river breaking all the walls. Let hope come pouring over every weary town. What kind of world would guarantee no one stands alone?
Where dignity's a birthright and every heart can dream. A place where kindness isn't rare, it's the baseline scheme. No walls between the people, no barriers to climb. Harmony and laughter ringing out in perfect time.
If fear is just a shadow, let's shine a light so bright. Illuminate the corners where we can share our mind. For together we can change the tune, rewrite the song we sing. Let love echo through the valleys, let the heart take wing. If you're gonna let it trickle down, let generosity flow, let you roll like a river breaking all the walls. Let hope come pouring over every weary town. What kind of world will guarantee no one stands alone? So let it trickle down, not greed, not blame. Let's rise to one another, lift the weight of shame. Let hope, let truth, let kindness crown every heart and town. If something's gonna trickle down, let love be what comes down. Oh, let it trickle down. Let love be what we share.
Let your voice be a river. Let it show that you care. In a world that's sometimes heavy, we can lift the frown. Together we can build it up. Let it trickle down. Oh.
They asked him how much money now. What will it take to feed this crowd? He didn't speak of coins or gold. He broke the bread the story told. He took the little placed in his hand, a simple gift, no grand command. He shared it out, no fear, no shame, and plenty more from giving came.
It wasn't kings who led the way, not wealth, not power on display. A nameless boy with bread and fish began the miracle with his wish. He gave what little he could spare, and others felt the call to share. One small act, a rolling tide, and hunger faded side by side.
So if we're waiting for the sign, the change we seek, the grand design, it starts the same as long ago, with what we have and letting go.
Let loaves and fishes multiply when open hearts